Senator Latz.
So here's my concern. First of all, I think we need to have a fiscal note so we understand if there's a cost impact, certainly within this biennium and the next biennium with tails, so we can evaluate that. And I know the response is going to be you can't put a value on the harm that's caused by these offenders, and I would agree, you can't. But we do need to factor in the budgetary impact of our bills, and that's just part of what we have to do. Secondly, in some views, legitimately so, there is no place on this grid that would be sufficient to punish those who have perpetrated this harm or engaged in this illegal conduct. And, that's, I get that. But the fact is, we have different levels of offenses in the statute. We have different crimes in the statute. And just like we have different distinctions between levels of killing another person, including, the circumstances surrounding it, the motivation that's behind it, the planning that goes into it, those kind of things. We draw distinctions, even though obviously the harm to the victim is, in that case, irreparable. And one would say in these kind of cases, not as significant as a killing, but certainly very, very serious. Between the different kinds of offenses, and we draw distinctions between the levels of offenses, whether it's going to be a 20-year or a 15-year felony, for example. And so I think it's appropriate for the Guidelines Commission to draw distinctions as well. I think the rationale that Ms. Mitchell has laid out for the judgment of the majority of the Guidelines Commission is a logical one for the variety of reasons. And if we want to set aside the bed impact for a moment, because I think that's purely a budgetary question as far as I'm concerned. But if you just on the merits of what consequences are appropriate, given that in most cases it won't make a difference because of the nature of the charges, and given that there are already substantial increases related to these things, and for the other distinctions that Ms. Mitchell explained, I don't see, other than the general desire to punish more seriously people who commit child sex offenses. I don't see, as the statutes are distinctive, I don't see the reason to just lump them all together. I think they ought to be distinct in the consequences on the Guidelines Commission grid or on the sex offender sentencing grid as well. And I think Ms. Kelly has laid out a very solid rationale for drawing those distinctions. This stuff is enormously complicated. There's a lot of judgment calls involved here. I just think, we ought to be really careful here as we analyze this, not to reach our conclusions because we think the conduct is abhorrent, which I think we would all agree it is, but because there are different kinds of conduct involved and that different kinds of conduct ought to be punished differently. And that's what is reflected in the Guidelines Commission's decision. So I think I would agree with the way the Guidelines Commission has characterized these offenses in relation to the other kinds of sex offenses that they are dealing with. And the more you flatten these grids too, the more you just combine all the different types of offenses into one consequence. And then you're not drawing the distinctions that the legislature has drawn in the way things are charged out, in the way we have defined crimes. We've defined differences between possession and production and dissemination. And I think our grid for sentencing purposes should accurately reflect those distinctions rather than combining them or flattening the grid into one big section. Otherwise, we could just say, all of these should be X number of years in prison, default, period, done. But we don't do that. So I think I support the guidelines proposal as it is, and I'm not comfortable throwing those other provisions into a different guidelines grid as the bill before us proposes to do. And I don't think it's a matter of let's implement the original legislative intent here. I think the original legislative intent is reflected in the Guidelines Commission's decision. And so I'm quite comfortable with that, understanding this is an uncomfortable kind of a topic for all of us to have to work our way through. And I mean, I get the emotions behind it, and I get the impact on victims and all of that. But we have a job, which is to make rational distinctions where they're appropriate. And I think I like the Guidelines Commission's rational distinctions that they have made. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.